Good morning, Cottage Hill Baptist Church. Would you please thank Ignite Worship one more time? You know, our motto, we've got a campaign slogan this year that says, experience the difference. That's an example. Because you don't see in America at many universities young people on Sunday mornings doing this like these guys do each and every week. It's just an amazing thing to witness, so I do appreciate them. We do love Cottage Hill Baptist Church. I tell folks all the time, we've got many partners, but this is our number one partner, I guarantee you. A month from tomorrow, Christmas Spec will transform this entire room for a few days. You guys are so good to us. Jared, I don't know if he's in here still. Jared scared me a while ago. He said, I've been married 40 years. It's been actually 43. I wonder if the last three something happened, but it's actually 43 years we've been married, so I want to correct that. Today, we've got a little table outside. I don't spend time in the pulpit doing a commercial, but Rihanna's out there. If you've got high school juniors, seniors, go by and see her. I am convinced more than ever what we do at the University of Mobile is needed. Please go see her, talk to her, get brochures, have a conversation. See me after church. Let's talk about that. Today, I've got a message that I believe is important to everyone in this room. You know, a lot of you guys today should have been in Israel. 2 weeks ago, you were excited about to go on this adventure, an amazing adventure. The events of the last weekend changed your situation, changed the entire world. Who could have foretold that would happen? Well, that kind of ties into my message today. I'm going to talk today about faith. If you've got your scripture with you, turn to Hebrews chapter 11. We'll look at verses 8 through 19. Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 19. Do you remember about 10 years ago, Walgreens had a commercial campaign where they talked about the town of perfect. Remember the town of perfect? Remember that? The concept was, if everywhere is perfect, you would not need Walgreens. You wouldn't need last-minute batteries, medical supplies, food. If it's all perfect, you would not need Walgreens. I've got, if it works, a small sample of one of these ads. Can we run that for a second here?
In a town called Perfect, the only crime is not having ice cream on your pie. Elevator music isn't the usual. Carpets never stain. And the local bank has hundreds of branches. Of course, we don't live anywhere near perfect, so there's Walgreens, open every day, many 24 hours, with everything needed for the real world. That's life. This is Walgreens.
Remember that? Okay, 2 disclaimers. I'm not endorsing Walgreens. Second of all, the Pasta Pro is not 1995 anymore. Don't go buy a Pasta Pro. We're not doing that either. But here's the point. If we lived in perfect, think about this, if we lived in perfect, we would not need faith. What about this? If nothing ever surprised us, we wouldn't need faith. If everything always went according to our plans, we would not need faith. If every test was negative, if every diagnosis was great, if God revealed his plan and his outcomes in advance, we would not need faith. If every path was clearly marked, we would not need faith. We don't live in perfect, so we need faith. Now today, here's my question. Please write this down. Here's my question. When is faith needed the most? If we agree as a body that we need faith, and I think we agree on that, today's question is, when is faith most needed? To answer that, let's look at a man who I think might be the best example of faith in the Bible. That's Abraham. If you look in Hebrews 11, we call this chapter sometimes the Hall of Fame of the Faith. If it's the Hall of Fame, this guy's got the front statue because he's mentioned a lot in this chapter. It's very important we look at this. we'll see today through Abraham 4 answers to that question. Please write these 4 answers down. The sermon today, I'm not a deep theologian. It's very common sense stuff. I'm also sometimes brief. I heard a story one time about a little boy. He goes to an old country church with his grandfather, his first time visiting there. In the church, in the lobby, there's a big plaque. And on the plaque, there's about 25 names. The kid says to his grandfather, "Grandpa, what is this plaque?" The old man was kind of solemn. He said, "Well, that's the name of people that died in the service." The kids that died in the service, how long does this guy preach? Okay? That's not the case today. Today, when is faith most needed? Number 1, faith is most needed when the plan is unknowable. When the plan is unknowable. Look at verse 8 of chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. We'll break that down. That's amazing. It refers back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Here's the exact words. The Lord has said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." When the plan is not known, we need faith. Look at what God said do. He said to Abraham, "Leave the place of comfort and go." Look what he's leaving. It's familiar because it says leave your country. It's supportive. He said leave your people. It's secure. He said leave your father's household. Think about when Jesus called the disciples. These guys had not been to seminary, had not had formal training. They're fishermen. They were told, they were tax collectors, they were business people. They were told to leave their comfort zone. We oftentimes don't like to be uncomfortable, right? We don't like to leave that comfort zone. It's unsettling to go to a strange place. More so when we don't know the plan. That's very discomforting. It's dramatic because the verse in Hebrews says, "Go to a land I will show you." You go, I'll show you where later. Friends, that takes amazing faith. Imagine this. Suppose you go on a trip. You're online to book a hotel. You get the room, the dates you want. It's time to check out and pay the bill online, okay? You go to the checkout, and it says, when you get here, we'll tell you the price. Would you book that hotel? Probably not. What about you're on a plane at the airport? You're on the plane at 30,000 feet. The pilot says, "Okay, I'll now tell you where we're going." That'd be troubling, correct? That's what God told Abraham. You go, I will tell you later where you're going. In my mind, the 2 best inventions of the last 100 years, for me personally, Google Earth and maps on your phone, right? We can tell step by, I can look at it, I can see it, I know the plan on vacation, I know where I'm going, where the next turn is, I know that plan. That's easy. A disclaimer here about Abraham. God knew the plan all along because it says he will go to a place he would later receive. So God knew the plan. Don't ever think because we don't know it, God doesn't know it, correct? God knew the plan. Go to a place you'll later receive. Here's the amazing part. He obeyed and went even though he doesn't know where he's going. Now, this next line's important, very important. Not knowing or not understanding is not an excuse for not obeying. Try that again. Not knowing or understanding is no excuse for not obeying. When I was here about 2 or 3 years ago, I spoke about Ezekiel. Remember that story? God told Ezekiel to prophesy to a bunch of dry bones. Ezekiel had no idea why he's doing that, but we're told he did it. Right away he does it. I think of John chapter 20, the story of Thomas. When Jesus appeared, Thomas said, I want to touch him, I want to see him, I want to touch him. Jesus said to him, because you've seen me, you've believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet they believe. Folks, that's faith. When we don't know that plan and still believe, that's faith. It is scary not to know. I'm in my 5th year as president of the University of Mobile. 5th year seems like a quick time. About 6 months into my 1st year, I made the call because of COVID to shut the school down for 6 months. When I did that, I had no idea how or if we'd ever come back. That was a scary time. I did not know the plan. God knew it. He knew we'd come back and prosper, which we have. It was a scary time. It had not been done in our history. We don't like to venture out when we don't know the conclusion. We need faith when we don't know the plan. When there's no procedure manual, we need faith. Now, first of all, point 1, we need faith when the plan is unknowable. But number 2, when the provision is unsuitable. Watch this one. When the provision is unsuitable. This is verses 9 and 10. Look at verse 9. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. Verse 10, he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Folks, faith does not seem as important when we're prospering. Nothing wrong with prospering. If you're prospering, be thankful to God. But sometimes, if we're prospering, all of a sudden, faith doesn't seem so necessary. Abraham did not live imperfect. It tells us in these verses, he was a stranger. In that day, and in this day, people don't take kindly to strangers. There's a suspicion, sometimes a hostility. He was a stranger. It says he lived in tents, a nomadic, non-permanent existence. Now, personal survey here, by show of hands, how many of you like what I call roughing it? Maybe camping in tents, by show of hands. How many like roughing it? Camping. I see a bunch of hands. I don't understand you people, okay? I do not like that. When we rough it, to us, that means in a hotel, basic cable, okay? I don't like roughing it, but he's in tents, a nomadic existence. He's also in danger. If you read the background of this story, he feared he'd be killed. He thought he'd be killed because the strangers would take his wife. He lives in danger. He lives in discomfort. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 10, we're told there's a famine, for goodness sakes. He's in a strange place, a hostile place, in the middle of a famine. The provisions were not suitable. That video in Perfect, there were trees full of money, right? That's not where Abraham lived. If you're like me, it's not where I live. It's not where you live. Sometimes provisions are not suitable. He was not sent to a place of comfort. I've often thought about this. What if God called me to the mission field? He is not, but what if God called me to the mission field? I would pray things like, Jesus, people in Hawaii need you too. I'll go, okay? I would try to set the terms to go to a good place. What if we're called to Egypt, to a place of famine, to a place of danger, where provisions aren't suitable? Jesus did not say, follow me, let's go live in perfect. He didn't say that. Matter of fact, he said, leave all and follow me. Give it all up and follow me. That's not a place of comfort. Remember in Matthew chapter 20, strange request, the mother of James and John said to Jesus privately something like this: when you get in your kingdom, can my sons sit on your left and right? Typical mom, can my sons have the place of honor in your kingdom? Remember what Jesus said? He didn't say, sure, it'll be great. What did he say? He said, lady, you don't know what you're asking. Can you take up that cross and follow me? He told her, it sounds easy, it sounds perfect, it's a rough journey to get there. That's what Abraham saw. Jesus never promised we would live in perfect. As a matter of fact, did he not promise just the opposite? Follow me, you will face hardships. You will face persecutions. What did Jesus say about his own comfort? I've got no place, he said, to lay my head down. The animals do, the birds do, but I don't, Jesus said. It was not a place of provisions. It was not a call to prosperity. Side note, I know Alan Floyd many years, he would not do this. If a pastor ever says to you, on TV, in person, if a pastor ever says, follow Jesus, you'll face a life of prosperity, run for the back door. That is not biblical. It's taught many times. I've heard it many times. It's not biblical. We're not promised prosperity on this earth. The Apostle Paul gave us, I think, maybe the best account of what unsuitable provisions look like. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he gave us kind of a resume of his recent life. He said this: I've been imprisoned, beaten, I've faced bandits, shipwrecked, I've been threatened by the Jews and the Gentiles, without food, cold, naked, a thorn in the flesh. Folks, how's your week been? Can you compare to that? He's got a thorn in the flesh. How does he respond? How do we respond? Do we say, woe is me, why am I getting persecuted like this? Why am I being picked on by God? He says this. In the next chapter, in chapter 12, verse 10 of 2 Corinthians, he said this: that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. Watch this. When I'm weak, he said, then I am strong. By show of hands, who delights in persecutions? Not many hands. Who delights in having provisions that aren't suitable? That takes faith. For Paul to say, when I'm weak, I'm strong, what is he saying? That's when I need my faith the most. When I face this, I need faith. In perfect, I don't. In the real world, I do. Remember this: Satan and God talked about Job one time. Remember this? God said to Satan, look at Job. There's nobody more faithful. What did Satan say? Of course he is. He's got it made. He's got everything. He's got all the provisions that are suitable. God did what? Took it all away. Yet Job remained faithful. It's not based on the circumstances. So first of all, we need faith when the plan is unknowable. We need faith when provisions are unsuitable. Number three, we need faith when the promise is unreasonable. Watch this one, verses 11 and 12. Verse 11, and by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Verse 12, and so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. This promise did not make any sense. This was an unreasonable promise. These folks were way past that childbearing age. That boat had sailed as far as they were concerned. It's a great story, by the way, in Genesis 17. When God made this promise, how'd they react? Yes, Lord, I believe it. We're told in Genesis 17 and look at verse 16. Here's the promise. I will bless her, will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she'll be mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Okay? The reaction is this in verse 17. He fell face down and laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? That promise did not seem reasonable. We need faith when the promise is unreasonable. If the question is, could you have kids at this age? The earthly answer without faith is, that can't happen. Translation, say what? That cannot be. God often makes promises that seem unreasonable. Think about this. If every promise made sense, we don't need faith. We need faith when the promise is unreasonable. Remember the story of Naaman. He had leprosy. God, through the prophet, said, to cure your leprosy, go wash in the Jordan River. That didn't make sense. That's not a medical thing. That promise did not seem reasonable. He told Joshua, if you guys want to capture this big city, don't attack it. Just march around it a few times, blow the trumpets, the city is yours. That does not sound reasonable. What Abraham heard did not seem reasonable. God's promises to us often seem that way. An example in Romans 10:13, a promise. We're told this, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. We might say that's unreasonable because you don't know my past. The promise says everyone will be saved. We say, wait a minute, you don't know what I've done. Or Matthew 11:28. Here's the promise. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. We might say, that's not reasonable because you don't know the burden I'm carrying, right? It may seem easy to others, but God, that's not reasonable. You don't know what I'm going through. You don't know my burden. At that time to us, the promise seems unreasonable. That's when faith is needed the most. Now, a side note. If we had to earn God's promises, they would indeed be unreasonable. If I had to earn God's favor and God's grace and God's promise, then it would be unreasonable. We're told, though, God's promises are received through faith. By the way, aren't you glad of that? Aren't you glad grace comes through faith and not by working for it? That makes this a whole lot more manageable. With faith, the promise is fulfilled. We're saved by faith, not by works. We can have faith because he is faithful. This a while ago said that. We can have faith because he is faithful. Now, here comes the big one. I warn you. We need faith when the plan's unknowable, when provisions are unsuitable, when the promise is unreasonable. Here's the toughest one, number 4, when the path is unexplainable. Hang on, this one's tough. We need faith when the path is unexplainable. This is verses 17 through 19. Verse 17, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Stop there for a second. This one, if you know the background, will blow your mind. This one does not make any sense. It cannot be explained in human terms. Because of verse 18, which says, even though God had said to him, it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Verse 19, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. The path oftentimes cannot be explained. In our main building on campus, Weaver Hall, you walk in the front door, there are two big signs on either side with arrows. It points to offices this way, offices that way. We change those things from time to time. The offices get changed. What do? Just change the arrows. So the path is always up to date, hopefully. It always shows you exactly where you need to go. We put up new signs. In the town of Perfect, the path is always marked. It's clearly marked. We know exactly where we're going and why we're going. But the context here is amazing. Back in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, we hear this. Sometime later, God tested, not tempted, but tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, watch this, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. This context is amazing. God had promised, back to those kids, remember that a while ago with Sarah, God had promised Abraham, in your old age, I will miraculously allow Sarah to have a child. That child will be the promised child. The Messiah will come through him. Miraculous, the promise fulfilled. We now come later, he's being told, take that same son and go kill him. That does not make sense. How do you explain that? How do we react when the path cannot be explained? God, you promised this, I followed, but now this has happened. How do we explain that? That's where faith is needed the most. Other cases, back to those, remember the disciples again, back to the disciples. They had been told to give it all up and follow Jesus. Well, they did. They dropped their nets, left their families, they followed Jesus. They obeyed. It comes down to the last week of Jesus' earthly life. What happens? The soldiers come, take him away, he's on the cross. What are they thinking? Jesus, we followed you. We did what you said do. We left it all. We gave it up to follow you. We left our family, our friends, our comfort zone. Remember Peter? Got the sword, whacked off the guy's ear? That was not his plan for Jesus to go to the cross. That path did not make sense. We cannot explain the ways of God short of faith. Just recently, think about this. Back to the mission field. A person gets a call to a hostile place. A lot of folks would say, no, I'm not going. I'm not going to do that. They resist. This person says, okay, I will follow God's calling. I'll go to this hostile place. They get there and get murdered. That's happened recently. Does that make sense? Can you explain that? No. You cannot explain that. That path is unexplainable. Good friend of ours, Michael Catt, he had cancer, the same cancer I had 10 years ago. Here I am, he died a few months ago, man of God, great influence, in the prime of his ministry, still preaching God's word, he dies of cancer. How do you explain that? You don't. A tornado comes through a town. destroys the church, the bar across the street is still standing. I saw it the other day on a film, on a video. You cannot explain the path. One of the best-selling books of all time is this book with the title, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? It has sold millions of copies. It's a question we ask because the path, since we're not imperfect, the path is often unexplainable. This is by far the toughest time to have faith, but it's the time we need it the most. Of all 4 points today, this one's the toughest. Remember Job, back to Job here. Job lost it all. Lost his wealth, his family, his health. He lost it all. And Satan was convinced, I'll show God, if he's not prosperous, if this path cannot be explained, he'll forsake God. He'll curse God. His wife even said, why don't you just curse God and die? What did Job say in Job 13:15? He said this, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Translate that, though he slay me, I'll still have faith. Though the path cannot be explained, I will still have faith. Folks, if we can master this one, we've come a long way. This one is tough. What an example of faith. That's a big one. Let me kind of land this thing here. If we lived imperfect, we would not need faith. If we lived imperfect. However, we live in an imperfect world. Because of sin, it's an imperfect world. The trees don't have money. The dog on the staircase will leave footprints, unlike that one a while ago. We don't live in perfect, it's an imperfect world. But like Abraham, we endure now because we know, as he said, or as was said about him, we're looking toward that city. Here's the good part. We don't live in perfect now, but watch this one. One day we will. We will one day live in perfect. Jesus told us this. In Matthew 6:19, familiar verse, Jesus said this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Why not? It's not perfect. He told us that. Moths and vermin destroy where thieves break in and steal. Little side note, by the way, if you're investing everything in this world, if you're putting all your faith in the things of this world, you're like Solomon who tried that. He ended up saying it was like chasing the wind. You can never catch it. He tried everything. He said it's like chasing the wind. But Jesus kept going. In the next verse, verse 20, he said this, but he said, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. There's perfect. Where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. Church, that's the perfect we're one day looking for. Now, here's the last catch. How can we live in perfect? Not in this world. How can we live in perfect? We've got the answer. In Psalms 18, verse 30, we read this. As for God, his way is, wait for it, perfect. His way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. He's gone ahead, we know, to prepare that perfect place for us. The beauty is, it's not exclusive. He's invited us to live with him in perfect. As our group makes their way back, let me lead us in a closing prayer, then they'll close the service. As they kind of make their way back here, I want to ask you two very important questions. with heads bowed and eyes closed, two important questions. First of all, heads bowed, eyes closed, very personal question. Do you need your faith strengthened? Do you find yourself in one of those four categories? Maybe more than one. Maybe the path can't be explained. Maybe the promise of God seems unreasonable. Maybe you're struggling with provisions. Maybe you can't explain God's plan right now. If you find yourself in one of those categories, and you would simply say, please, as we close today, pray for me, right where you sit. If that's you today, would you just lift a hand? If you need prayer for any of those categories, I see a lot of hands. Keep it up, I see a lot of hands. All in the balcony, lots of hands across this room. That shows honesty. That shows sincerity. Friends, we don't live in perfect, but God has promised us through faith. We will one day. Thank you. Put them down. Question two, still with heads bowed. We've looked today at 4 times when faith is needed. There's another time, and it is the most important of all. That time is when we first put our faith in Him. If we don't come to that saving faith, the other 4 don't come into play. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. If you today, again with heads bowed, if you would say, I need that faith, I need a saving faith in Christ, because I want to one day live in perfect with Him. If you would say today, I need that faith, would you lift a hand? I will try to see the hands. Would you lift a hand? I'm looking around. I see a hand. See another hand. Still looking around. Heads bowed. Keep it up. If you would say, I need that kind of faith. Okay, thank you. Put them down. Father, today, I thank you again for the chance to come to this great fellowship. Father, I pray today that the words we've heard today, not my words, that's not important, your word. We've looked at your word. I pray today that your word would pierce us in a new way. In a crowd this size, Lord, in a crowd this big, there are people that are hurting over issues of faith. There are people today in this room, by hands that have been lifted, that say, I don't know where this path leads. Or I don't know how to explain what God is asking. I don't know why I'm where I'm at. I've tried to follow God. I've tried to follow Christ, yet this keeps happening. I don't understand. Lord, today, many have said that. I pray in this moment that you would reach down. You would strengthen our faith. You would show us new ways to trust in you. Father, for the ones that lifted their hands and said, I need saving faith, would you today pierce those hearts? Would you give them the courage to pray that prayer, to ask forgiveness and ask you into their lives? Would you give them courage to seek one of these pastors today, to come and talk, to seek counsel? Lord, in these closing moments, would you be real? Would your presence shine on us today? Thank you again for this day you've given us together. We ask all these things in your name.